I don't have to march you through that. If you've forgotten about it, there's a marvelous book co-edited by Lawrence Dawson and Peter Russell, Parliamentary Democracy in Crisis. Order forms here that will march you through it and give you opinions, lots of different opinions on it. And you know that crisis. And then we've had another one, I would call a serious controversy about what is proper in terms of prorogation that you've been going through and that brought your organization into existence. And then we have a rather major issue that I thought was settled in 1689 in England when Parliament asserted its supremacy over the Crown. And that is a question of parliamentary privilege. A majority of members of Parliament asked to see papers and have been denied that. And I thought we won that battle a few centuries ago, but apparently not. We taught, you know, my lecture is called Our Parliamentary Fundamentals Are Unsound. I hope you're beginning to see why I say that. We often talk about our economic, we have problems, unemployment, inflation are going in the wrong directions. But usually, when people are commenting on Canada, they can say, well, Canada's economic fundamentals are pretty sound. It's going to come out of this pretty well. It's not, and I think that's true right now of our economic fundamentals. But our parliamentary fundamentals, I would say, are less sound than those of any parliamentary country I know. I include Italy. I include some of the Basque cases. I mean, we are in a mess. And some people say, well, it's just minority parliaments. That's all it is. Well, we know what majority parliaments are like. In minority parliaments, we have a dysfunctional situation. What happens in majority parliaments? Well, majority parliament parliament's irrelevant. We saw that all through the Chrétien years. We saw a little less so in the Mulroney years, but certainly in the Trudeau years. Jeffrey Simpson wrote a wonderful book called The Friendly Dictatorship. I wasn't quite sure about the friendly, why it was so friendly, but that was Mr. Chrétien's centralization of power in the Prime Minister's office, and Parliament can go to hell. So we're faced, as a parliamentary democracy, with minority parliaments that are dysfunctional, or majority parliaments that make Parliament irrelevant. That's pretty unsound. That's fundamentally unsound. And where are we today? In March, the session is open. I'm a continual optimist. I hope it's a little bit better. I was interested, though, in Andrew Coyne, who's a pretty good observer. I don't know if you read Maclean's 2 weeks ago, March 22nd. He has quite a good 3 pages on the new session, and what he's afraid of is that very word fear. That the two sides now are frozen with fear. They're afraid to introduce anything. They're afraid of an election. They don't want an election, but more, they don't want to be responsible for an election. So they're afraid to do anything. They're afraid to introduce any policies, anything that might lead to a major vote. Well, that's a new aspect of dysfunction. Well, let me say a little bit about why minority parliaments, there's a lot of evidence in another book I'll tell you about, minority parliaments don't have to be like ours have been for the last few years. If you have any doubt about it, here's a book. It's called 2 Cheers for Minority Government. I wrote it. It came out in 2008, and lots of order forms here. But what I show in that, if you take the time to look at a couple of chapters, that around the parliamentary world, and this is the parliamentary world I'm talking about, not talking about congressional presidential systems. I'll come back to that. Part of our problem having a good parliamentary democracy in Canada is we're mesmerized by the American system of government. We watch it far more closely than we watch our own. But in the parliamentary democratic world, the norm are minority or coalition governments. The only countries where you don't have minority or coalitions, and often the coalitions are minority governments themselves, are where you don't have electoral reform, mainly United Kingdom and Canada. Because once you have a really fair voting system with multi-party systems in all the democracies, the public are divided between a number of parties, and if the parliament they elect really reflects their viewpoints, you will have minority parliaments. And do you think the entire parliamentary world is going to hell in a handbasket? Do you think all of Western Europe, all of Scandinavia, New Zealand, sick countries can't manage their economy, can't get anything done? Well, if you do, you haven't been on the same planet. And I have a lot of people will make that point, because I gave you the clue earlier. They're into the I and I syndrome. The only alternatives to what we have are Italy and Israel, both of which have, particularly Israel. Israel's a kind of hybrid system with a president, a different system than ours. But most of the parliamentary world has minority or coalition governments, and they get the job done. They're not into electionitis. They're effective parliaments supporting effective governments. And that indeed has been our experience many times with minority parliaments. One chapter walks you through the 12 minority governments we had before Harper's second. His is the 13th minority parliament we've had since 1921. That's an interesting date. Why did Peter Russell say since 1921? Well, here's why. Up to 1921, we had a two-party system. Now do the math. You will have majority parliaments when there's just two parties. Tweedledum will beat Tweedledee and have more votes and more seats, okay? Once you get a multi-party system, three or more, that's what we've had since 1921, you're going to have, and we have had, a lot of minority parliaments. Indeed, as I show in my book, the main alternative to a minority parliament is a parliament that supports what I call a false, not that word, majority government. A false majority government is a government that failed to get a majority of the electorate to support it, but because of our electoral system, was able to put together a majority in the House of Commons. We've had plenty of those, and in recent years, the popular vote of our false majority governments has been in the low 40s. Mr. Crescian never got above 41. The election where he got 41%, he said, I swept the country. Well, Jean, oh boy, you know, about 60% of the people, you didn't sweep them. And those are governments that we've had as the main alternative to minority governments. We've only had there's just three true majority governments since 1921. A true majority supported by a majority of the voters and with a majority of seats in the House of Commons. And the last one was Brian Mulroney, a deep sweep in '58, and Mackenzie King in 1940. Now, those governments, you got to look at them all. I give about 2 or 3 pages on each of the minority governments we've had. Mr. Keane had 3 and so on. Diefenbaker had a couple. Mackenzie King Lester Pearson had 2. And so some of them were duds.